All right, you've been following. I'm sure you saw the last video when the CBN governor was directly or indirectly making executive decisions as per increasing the capital base of banks. Before we go into the nitty gritty, you don't need to be an economist to be able to perceive what you think should really be the major germane issues to be discussed. Do you think at this point in time the commercial banks need to recapitalize? Let's start from there.
Thank you very much, Shegun. Uh, I think the needful have to be done to ensure the survival of depositors' funds. What I read earlier on was that many of these money deposit banks are owing CBN huge sums of money in terms of loans that they have taken in order for them to remain solvent. And unless you recapitalize, one day we may end up having a collapse of this bank. And if they do collapse, it's the depositors' fund that will be trapped. And we have that under this issue of recapitalization did happen under former CBN governor Chukwuma Soludo.
Exactly.
I think
Under
around
Obasanjo's
2008.
administration, yes.
Yes. And you could see that that's why Nigerian financial system is robust after the recapitalization. So at that time, they were asked to recapitalize to 25 billion. And what we learned now is that actually about 10 of these money deposit banks are now having trillions in terms of their capitalization. But there are some others that are not pulling their weight and needed to be made to recapitalize because all said and done, it's a vicious circle, Shegun. It's a vicious circle to the extent that federal government is also owing many of these money deposit banks huge sums of money, which it has failed to pay back and serviced. And
Was going
that
to
has
add that.
affected the liquidity.
Yeah,
And that has affected the liquidity of these banks.
exactly.
Because situations where federal and state government goes to, you need to see the debt configurations of how much federal and state or subnational entities are owing our money deposit banks. It's very huge.
Continue. I think as the
It's,
conversation continues, my producer should be showing those slides of domestic and foreign debts. We have the slides.
okay.
Go on.
So if you look at that slides, you'll find out that um, federal government and state governments are actually culpable in the non-solvency of some of these banks, because situations where you borrow from these money deposit banks, either to pay salaries or to fix infrastructures, and you fail to service these debts and also pay back when as and when due, you are also contributing to the non-solvency of some of these banks. And the right thing to do would be in the face of recapitalization, which I quite agree that it's necessary to recapitalize, we also must put the blame where it is, which is, some of those who owe these banks huge sums of money and have refused to pay. Some of these debts, as you will know, Shegun, are now being classified as bad debt. Bad debt that has now been taken over by AMCON, because the those who borrowed from those banks have refused to pay or honor their payment schedule. So we are in a very huge and big dilemma, given the fact that, yes, some of these banks also are themselves very guilty of not doing the needful. How can you borrow money out without collateral? Some of the bank loans are not collateralized, they are not securitized. And so when the whoever borrows, whether it's state, company, or individual, when they fail to meet their repayment obligation, it affects the liquidity of these banks. But to the main issue at play, I quite agree that there should be recapitalization to enable the banks to remain solvent. And the interesting thing is that the issue of merger and acquisition that have now entered our political lexicon in 2013 were first started by the banks under Chukwuma Soludo as CBN governor, where there was a merger and acquisition of some banks that are distressed. And under Buhari, we also know that some of those banks have been sold and recapitalized. One of them was, I think, Skybank,
Yeah.
that was sold and then
And then we have
recapitalized,
Polaris Bank. But Mr. Jide,
and then
still on this
Polaris.
argument, Mr. Jide, still on this argument, I quite like the fact that you said, yes, it is good to recapitalize, to give some kind of succor and security to the funds of the average Nigerian citizen. But here you have also said categorically and as a matter of fact that one of the major problems of the banks is that government at subnational level and even at federal level have borrowed monies from these same banks and have refused to pay back. I recall under the administration of Buhari, the administration went as far as going into the pool of the pensions funds to borrow trillions without a clear plan to pay back. So I'm saying if we draw a matrix of priority, should, as beautiful and as economically sound as recapitalization is good, should the priority really be recapitalization or forcing government institutions to pay back monies to the money deposit banks so as to strengthen their capital base? That has been my argument. But you are free to defer.
You are quite on point. Two things can happen simultaneously. Don't forget that as we talk about government borrowing and not paying the money deposit banks, there is also issues around inflation that has also affected the value of naira.
That is true.
And of course, part of the rationale why the immediate past CBN government of Emefiele actually embarked on e-money was to reduce the cost of maintaining the paper currency.
Yeah, the paper
Because
fiat. Yes.
as you will know, these currencies are printed
At a
by a
cost.
different institution and at a huge cost.
True.
It's not the CBN that has the machine through which it prints money. It's outsourced to Nigeria Printing and Minting
Security
Company,
printing and meeting company, yes.
Security Printing and Minting. And in some instances, we are even told that these currencies are printed abroad. So the issue then becomes, what is the value, the cost of maintaining this currency that is in the vault of the banks? So while it is quite true that Nigerians have largely embraced electronic transfer of funds and have also improved significantly on what I will call digital money.
Yeah.
Arising from the
The
whole
cashless
RON
policy.
experiences,
Yes.
that the cashless policy that Godwin Emefiele forced down our throat, which has now made everybody, including those selling pepper and onions, now carry
POS
they now
machines.
carry a
Yeah,
POS
terminals, yes.
to ensure
Which I think is a good thing anyway, but go on.
Do you know I've used POS to buy newspaper, 200 naira newspaper.
Is it not convenient for you? Don't you like it?
No, what I'm saying is that part of the larger problem that banks face is
Yes.
the maintenance cost of our currency.
Yes.
Because aside from the fact that it comes at a huge cost to print each of those currency,
Yes.
they also have a lifespan. And that's why you see
Yeah.
that after a while, some of those countries needed to be sorted out
Yes.
and bumped.
And few new ones printed
So
again.
with
Yes.
new ones minted.
Yes.
Unfortunately, even the new currency that was purportedly, used to replace the one that were arrested, have not circulated well enough. And so the whole argument, my brother Shegun, is that I agree with you 100% that it's a two-way thing. Why recapitalization is good, part of the recapitalization agenda is for these banks to sell shares to the members of the public
Yeah. To
to
expand
buy
capital
into
base.
their
Yes.
to expand the capital base. But it's not limited to that. It's also to ensure that states and federal authorities who are owing these banks also pay what they are owing to the banks. Because when on paper you are said that your bank is worth 550 billion and your liquidity is half of that amount, then there's a problem. Because and this is part of why Governor Emefiele ended up printing over 22 trillion in ways and means to Buhari administration. You recall that early this year, shortly before the handover of Buhari, the National Assembly, particularly Senate, have to approve in arrears, have to approve the ways and means of over 22 trillion. That was ways and means you go and print money
Yes.
that is not that you have not had in order to maintain some measure of liquidity. Now we are facing that
Equilibrium.
challenge. We are facing that challenge of ways and means, and government is not alive to its obligation of repaying these money deposit banks from whom many state governments have borrowed money to pay salaries and to improve infrastructures. Because usually what the state houses of assembly and the federal legislature does is to approve the borrowing plan of the president or the governor, as it were. Now, when you have a borrowing plan and you said that you are going to pay back, you are dealing with a ceteris paribus situation, all things being equal. All things will never be equal, as you know. All things will never be equal. So you find many state governments defaulting in their repayment to their money deposit banks that have helped them to raise money. I recall that there are some ventures where some state government coerced banks operating in their state to fund. And these any banks that fail to support that initiative, those banks will be blacklisted and will not be allowed to hold government funds. So it's a very dicey situation. But I quite agree that multiple efforts have to be made. One, to recapitalize by selling shares. I hold some of the bank shares, although it's worth next to nothing now because of devaluation. And many of these banks are not even paying dividends. So, but as it were, they need to recapitalize in order to stay solvent. And let me also say this, Shegun, it's not peculiar to Nigeria if banks are having issues. Did you know that in US, two banks were distressed this year alone? Two banks were distressed, and they have to be bailed out. So the bailout fund
Through the Federal
that
Reserve.
US government under Joe Biden has approved is what has saved some of these banks in US. So it tells you that it's a global challenge that is faced by financial institutions. But what I'm saying is that it's a two-way thing, if we can put it that way. Why banks I agree that there should be recapitalization. There should also be
Pay back
repayment of
what they are
whatever.
owing.
Yes, federal
Because
and state
governments are the
and
biggest lenders from these banks. If you check all the debt
so
profile
they,
from
they
each
need
of
to
the
pay
money
back.
deposit bank, government has the highest chunk.
So the government at whatever level, federal, state, or local, needs to pay back what they are owing these banks so that these banks don't go under. And I think it behoves federal government and state government to rather resort to foreign lending rather than fishing in a small pool like the Nigerian financial institutions, because it pays you better to go to Exim Bank of China to borrow, or to Afrexim Bank of Egypt to borrow, than to be borrowing from local banks where the susu money of you and I are kept. And then when it is time for us to withdraw our funds, the internet bank suddenly develop fault. You will not be able to make transaction. And then if you go queue at the banks to collect your money, they start telling you you have to wait. They are having technical problem. There is no
All the
technical
time.
problem
All the
all the time.
it even got
Is that
so bad. It even got so bad. Normally, for mobile banking, when you're doing transfers, there's a limit with which you can do transfer. Once you want to exceed it, they will either tell you to send a request for a token or a PIN. It's that bad that even banks, when it gets to that level, they will disable. So when you want to make a transfer that's higher than your limit, you ask for token and PIN, it will never come, and they will tell you it is technical
yeah.
issues. But
And let me also tell you this.
yes,
This is end of the month. Usually transfers made during these last few days of the month are
and
usually
towards the end of the
problematic
year,
because
yes,
they want to keep their balance sheet
their
healthy.
base, yes,
And so when people make withdrawals in the last few days of the month or an early in the new month, it affects how the
yes,
regulators will see their
exactly.
balance sheet. So maybe they disable those applications. You just find out that you will not be able to make
You won't
transfer
be able to do
on the
anything,
20 on
and
the
they keep
29th, 30th,
apologizing that it's
first
technical hitch
first and
and that they are
second
working on
of the
it.
month. So it's a lot of reform that needs to happen. A lot of reforms need to happen in our banking sector.
I quite
I
agree
quite
with you.
agree with
I quite agree.